It was a warm Saturday morning when I first noticed the golden retriever bounding across my freshly planted flower beds. I'd only been in the neighborhood for 3 weeks, barely long enough to remember which cabinet held the coffee mugs, and here was this beautiful dog, tongue lolling to one side, paws muddying my petunias, looking at me like we were long-lost friends. That's how I met Max, and consequently, how I met Jake, the man who would change everything for me. Let me back up a bit and introduce myself. My name is Alex Mitchell, and at 32, I found myself starting over in Oakwood Heights, a charming suburb with tree-lined streets and the kind of neighbors who actually wave when you drive by. I'd left behind a marketing job in the city that had consumed my life for 8 years, trading it for remote work and a small craftsman-style home with a yard that actually got sunlight. The house needed work, peeling paint on the porch, squeaky floorboards in the hallway, and a kitchen straight out of 1975, but it was mine, all mine. What I didn't anticipate was the loneliness. Sure, I'd been single for nearly 2 years after my last relationship imploded spectacularly when my ex decided monogamy was too restrictive for his artistic spirit. But in the city, being alone never felt quite so alone. There were always people, noise, movement. Here in Oakwood Heights, the silence of my empty house sometimes felt deafening, especially in the evenings when the neighborhood grew quiet and still. I'd always been a dog person, having grown up with a series of loyal mutts that my mom rescued from shelters. I'd been contemplating adopting one since moving in, even browsing the local shelter's website late at night. But something held me back. Commitment issues, perhaps? The irony wasn't lost on me. I could commit to a 30-year mortgage but not to a furry companion. Oakwood Heights had its own rhythm. I was learning. Morning joggers with expensive headphones, retired couples tending to immaculate gardens, young families with strollers and toddlers in tow. And dogs, so many dogs. There was the pair of corgis across the street that yapped incessantly at squirrels, the dignified old bulldog that waddled alongside Mrs. Peterson, and the tiny chihuahua that trembled even on warm days. I noticed them during my morning coffee ritual on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up while I tried to convince myself I'd made the right choice moving here. And then there was the golden retriever I'd glimpsed a few times, always at a distance, always alongside a tall man in running clothes. They jogged past my house early, before I'd fully woken up, just a blur of motion and energy that somehow made the morning feel more alive. I never got a good look at the man's face, just dark hair, broad shoulders, and an athletic stride that matched his dog's enthusiasm. I hadn't expected either of them to make a personal appearance in my yard, yet here we were, the golden retriever investigating my porch steps with great interest while I stood frozen, coffee mug in hand. Unsure of the proper protocol for unexpected canine visitors. "Hey there, buddy," I said cautiously, setting down my mug and slowly extending my hand. The dog immediately bounded over, all wagging tail and eager sniffs. His collar jingled with tags. I caught the name Max on one of them. "Max, huh? Where's your person, Max?" As if understanding my question, Max barked once and then proceeded to make himself at home, circling my small yard and sniffing every corner with the thoroughness of a customs agent. I watched, amused and slightly concerned, wondering if I should try to read the phone number on his tag or just wait for his owner to come looking. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, I heard someone calling from down the street, voice growing increasingly frantic with each unanswered call. "Max! Max, where are you? Come on, buddy." And then he appeared at my gate, the jogger I'd only seen from a distance. Up close, he was even more striking, probably around my age, with dark hair that curled slightly where it was getting too long around his ears, warm brown eyes currently wide with worry, and the kind of jawline that belonged in commercials for expensive watches. He was slightly out of breath, a sheen of sweat on his forehead suggesting he'd been searching for a while. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then Max bounded over to him, breaking the strange spell, and the man's face flooded with relief. "There you are, you troublemaker," he said to the dog, before looking up at me apologetically. "I'm so sorry about this." He saw a squirrel and the leash just slipped right out of my hand. "I hope he didn't cause any damage." I glanced at my trampled flowers and found I didn't care in the slightest. "No damage," I lied. "He seems like a friendly guy." "Too friendly sometimes," the man said with a rueful smile, extending his hand over the low fence. "I'm Jake. Jake Sullivan. We live in the blue house on the corner." "Alex Mitchell," I replied, shaking his hand and trying not to notice how perfectly warm it felt. "I'm still pretty new here." "I know," Jake said, then immediately looked embarrassed. I I noticed someone new moved in. Small neighborhood. Word travels fast. An awkward silence settled between us, broken only by Max's panting as he looked back and forth between us, tail still wagging as if he'd orchestrated this whole meeting. Well, Jake finally said, I should get this escape artist home. Sorry again for the intrusion. No intrusion, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. He's welcome anytime. Jake's smile widened, creating a small dimple in his left cheek. Careful with that invitation. He might take you up on it. I wouldn't mind, I said, realizing as the words left my mouth that I meant it. The brief visit had been the most excitement I'd had since moving in. Jake nodded, tugging gently on Max's leash. Maybe we'll see you around the neighborhood then. I'd like that, I replied, watching as they walked away, Max looking back at me once as if to say goodbye. I didn't expect that Max would indeed take my invitation literally, but the very next day, there he was again, this time scratching at my back door while I was making lunch. I opened it, surprised, and he trotted in like he owned the place, circling my kitchen island before sitting expectantly beside my refrigerator. Max? How did you get here? I asked, as if he might answer. I checked his collar. Yes, there was Jake's number. I should call him immediately, I knew, but something made me hesitate. Max looked so comfortable, so at home in my kitchen, and I realized with a pang how nice it was to have another living being in the house. You want a snack, buddy? I asked, and Max's tail thumped against the floor in enthusiastic agreement. I found some leftover chicken in the fridge, checked quickly online to make sure it was safe for dogs, and offered him a small piece. He took it gently from my fingers, his eyes never leaving mine. After he'd finished, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Max's tag. Jake answered on the second ring, his voice tight with worry. Hello. Hi, Jake? This is Alex Mitchell. From yesterday? I seem to have your dog in my kitchen. There was a moment of silence, then a heavy sigh of relief. You're kidding me. How did he even? I'm so sorry, Alex. I thought he was in the backyard. He must have dug under the fence again. It's really no problem, I assured him, watching as Max made himself comfortable on my kitchen floor. He's being a perfect gentleman. I'll come get him right away, Jake said, and I could hear movement on his end of the line. No rush, I said, surprising myself again. I'm enjoying the company, to be honest. There was a pause, then Jake's voice, softer now. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. I'm sure. Finish whatever you were doing. We're just hanging out. Another pause. I was actually in the middle of a work call that I can't really cut short. Would it be terrible if I came by in about an hour? That's perfect, I said, already looking forward to it. Max and I will be here. That hour with Max was surprisingly enjoyable. After exploring every corner of my downstairs, he settled next to me on the couch while I worked on my laptop. There was something deeply comforting about his warm weight against my leg, the rhythmic sound of his breathing. I found myself talking to him, explaining my work project, asking his opinion on color schemes. He responded with occasional tail wags and deep sighs of contentment. When the doorbell rang, Max immediately perked up, racing to the door with excited barks. I opened it to find Jake looking slightly harried, his hair damp as if he'd just showered, wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that fit him just right. I can't believe you did this, Jake said, stepping inside when I gestured for him to enter. I am so sorry. Honestly, it's been nice, I admitted. I've been thinking about getting a dog, actually. This was like a trial run. Jake's expression softened as he watched Max circle back to me, leaning against my legs. He likes you. He's usually more reserved with strangers. Maybe I just smell like chicken, I joked, then explained about the snack I'd given him. Jake laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill my previously empty living room. You've made a friend for life now. Feed Max once, and he's yours forever. Something about the way he said it made my heart beat a little faster. Would you like some coffee? Or water? I was just about to take a break anyway. Jake hesitated, glancing at his watch, then nodded. Coffee would be great, actually. If you're sure I'm not interrupting. As I led him to the kitchen, I realized this was the first time I'd invited anyone into my new home. There were still boxes and corners, blank spaces on walls where I hadn't hung pictures yet, the general unfinished feeling of a house still becoming a home. But Jake didn't seem to notice or mind. We talked easily over coffee, discovering we were both transplants to the area. Jake had moved from Seattle 3 years ago for a job in environmental engineering. He'd adopted Max from a rescue organization just 6 months after arriving. He saved me, really, Jake admitted, watching Max, who had settled between our chairs. I was working too much. barely leaving the house except to go to the office. Max forced me to get out, explore the neighborhood, meet people. I can see that, I said. I've been here 3 weeks and barely know anyone. Maybe I need a Max of my own. Jake studied me for a moment, his brown eyes thoughtful. The local shelter always needs volunteers for dog walking. It's a good way to get your dog fixed without the full commitment. Plus, you meet other volunteers. The way he said it made me wonder if he was one of those volunteers and if he was subtly suggesting I might see him there. Before I could ask, his phone buzzed. He checked it and grimaced. I have to get back for another call, he said apologetically. But thank you for the coffee. And for dog-sitting this troublemaker. Anytime, I said, and meant it. As they left, Max looking back at me from the sidewalk, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. My house seemed emptier somehow, quieter without Max's presence. But there was also a warm feeling I couldn't quite name, the afterglow of connection, perhaps. For the first time since moving to Oakwood Heights, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could belong here. I didn't expect Max to make a habit of visiting, but over the next 2 weeks, he showed up at my door no less than 4 times. Each visit followed the same pattern. Max would appear, I'd call Jake, and Jake would come retrieve him, usually staying for coffee or, once, for the lunch I impulsively invited him to share. Our conversations grew longer, more personal with each visit. I learned that Jake had ended a serious relationship just before moving here, that he played guitar but not well enough for anyone to hear, and that he volunteered at the animal shelter every other Saturday. I found myself sharing things too, about my burnout at my previous job, my disastrous last relationship, even my childhood dream of writing a novel that I'd never quite abandoned. Jake listened in a way that made me feel heard, really heard, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details I mentioned in passing. After the 4th escape, as we'd taken to calling Max's visits, Jake examined his backyard fence while I held Max's leash. I just don't understand how he's getting out, Jake said, running his hand along the bottom of the wooden fence. I've patched every hole I can find. I watched Max, who was sitting calmly beside me, looking for all the world like the most innocent dog imaginable. Maybe he's jumping over? Jake shook his head. It's 6 feet high. He's athletic, but not that athletic. I knelt down to Max's level, scratching behind his ears. What's your secret, buddy? How are you engineering these little adventures? Max licked my cheek, his tail wagging slowly. Jake straightened up, brushing dirt from his hands. You know what's weird? He only ever goes to your house. Mrs. Abernathy next door has treats she gives all the neighborhood dogs, and the Thompsons on the other side have that pond in their backyard that Max loves. But when he escapes, he always heads straight for you. There was something in Jake's tone that made me look up at him. He was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read, curiosity mixed with something warmer. Maybe he knows I'm lonely, I said lightly, trying to make a joke of it. Jake didn't laugh. Instead, he sat down on the grass beside us, his knee brushing against mine. Are you lonely? I mean, the directness of the question caught me off guard. I could have deflected, made another joke, but something about Jake's earnest expression made me want to be honest. Sometimes, I admitted, more than I expected to be. The city was never quiet enough to notice loneliness. Here, it's harder to ignore. Jake nodded slowly. I get that. My first year here, before Max, there were days when I realized I hadn't spoken to another human being out loud. Just emails, texts, the occasional phone call. It's a strange kind of isolation. Exactly, I said, relieved that he understood. And then this furry matchmaker started showing up at my door, and suddenly I'm having actual conversations with an actual person. As soon as the word matchmaker left my mouth, I felt heat rise to my face. Jake's eyes widened slightly, and I rushed to clarify. I mean, matching me with a potential friend. In the neighborhood. Someone to talk to. A slow smile spread across Jake's face. Right. Of course. An awkward silence fell between us, broken only by Max's contented sigh as he flopped onto his side in the grass. Well, Jake finally said, since my dog seems determined to keep bringing us together, maybe we should just cut out the middleman. Would you want to come over for dinner sometime? I make a mean lasagna. My heart did a little flip in my chest. I'd like that. A lot, actually. Friday? Around 7. Friday sounds perfect. As I walked home that afternoon, I couldn't help wondering if this was a date or just a neighborly dinner. The distinction felt important, yet I was afraid to examine why too closely. Jake was becoming a bright spot in my new life here. His easy laugh, the way he listened so intently, how comfortable I felt around him after just a few brief encounters. I didn't want to misread the situation and make things awkward. Friday arrived with unexpected nervousness on my part. I changed outfits 3 times, settling finally on dark jeans and a blue button-down that an ex once said brought out my eyes. I debated bringing wine before deciding on a small potted herb plant instead, practical but thoughtful, I hoped. Jake's house was charming, more settled and homey than mine, with comfortable furniture and photographs on the walls. Max greeted me enthusiastically at the door, circling and nudging at my hands until I petted him properly. He's been watching the window for the past hour, Jake said, taking the plant with a pleased smile. I think he knew you were coming. Dinner was delicious, the conversation even better. Jake was an attentive host, refilling my glass, asking questions that showed he remembered details from our previous talks. As we moved to his couch with coffee after dinner, Max settled between us, his head on my lap, Jake's hand occasionally brushing mine as we both petted him. Can I ask you something? Jake said during a comfortable lull in conversation. And feel free to tell me if I'm overstepping. Sure, I said, curious. You mentioned your ex a couple of times. The one who decided monogamy was too restrictive? Was that a serious relationship? I nodded slowly, wondering where this was going. For years. We lived together for 3 of them. I thought we were heading toward marriage, actually. Jake winced sympathetically. That's rough. I'm sorry. What about you? I asked. You mentioned ending something before moving here? Jake's expression grew more guarded. Yeah. Ryan and I were together for 6 years. He got a job offer in London that was too good to pass up. We tried long distance for a while, but... He shrugged. Some things aren't meant to survive 4,000 miles. My heart beat a little faster at the casual mention of Ryan. So Jake was gay too. The realization shouldn't have been as thrilling as it was. That must have been difficult, I said. 6 years is a long time. Jake nodded, absently stroking Max's back. It was. For a while, I thought I'd made a huge mistake not going with him. But eventually, I realized we'd been growing apart even before the move. The distance just made it impossible to ignore. Is that why you got Max? I asked softly. A smile touched Jake's lips. Partly. My therapist suggested a pet might help with the loneliness. Best advice I ever took. He looked down at Max, then back at me. Though lately I'm thinking maybe Max had his own agenda all along. There was something in his gaze that made my breath catch. What do you mean? Jake hesitated, then shifted slightly closer on the couch. I have a confession to make. The first time Max escaped and ended up at your house? That was genuine. But after that... He looked slightly embarrassed. I might have helped him a little. I stared at him. You what? Not every time, he hurried to add. But that second time? I may have accidentally on purpose left the gate unlatched. And I might have walked him past your house enough times that he knew exactly where to go. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Are you telling me you used your dog as a wingman? Jake's embarrassment gave way to a grin. Is it working? The directness of the question made my heart race. I'm sitting on your couch right now, aren't I? You are, he agreed, his voice softening. And I'm really glad about that. There was a moment, one of those moments where the air seems to change, where possibilities hover just within reach. Max chose that exact second to stand up, stretching dramatically before jumping off the couch, breaking whatever spell had been weaving between us. Jake cleared his throat. More coffee. I should probably head home, I said reluctantly, glancing at my watch. It was nearly midnight. We'd been talking for hours. Early meeting tomorrow. Jake walked me to the door, Max trailing behind us. At the threshold, we paused, that same electric potential humming between us. I had a really good time tonight, Jake said, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and subtle. Me too, I replied. We should do it again sometime. Definitely. Jake hesitated, then added, maybe next time we can call it what it is. My pulse quickened. And what's that? Jake's smile was both nervous and determined. A date? If you're interested. Relief and excitement flooded through me. I'm definitely interested. The walk home that night felt lighter somehow, as if something that had been coiled tight inside me for months, maybe years, had finally begun to unwind. For the first time since moving to Oakwood Heights, I didn't feel like a stranger in a strange place. I felt like someone beginning to belong. The next few weeks unfolded in a series of deliberate encounters. No more need for Max's escapes now that Jake and I were openly seeking each other's company. We fell into an easy rhythm. Morning runs with Max on weekends, dinner at each other's houses, movie nights where we paid more attention to our conversations than to the films. Jake introduced me to his small circle of friends, most of whom he'd met through the animal shelter. I started volunteering there too, spending Saturday afternoons walking dogs alongside Jake, learning the stories of each animal waiting for their forever homes. There was something deeply satisfying about watching Jake interact with the shelter dogs, his patience, his genuine affection for each one, the way he remembered their quirks and preferences. "You're good at this," I told him one Saturday as he coaxed a timid terrier mix out of her kennel. "They trust you." Jake shrugged, but I could tell he was pleased. Dogs are easier than people sometimes. They're honest about what they need. "And what do you need?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could consider its weight. Jake looked up at me, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm still figuring that out, but I think I'm getting closer." The shelter director, Elena, caught me later that day as I was hanging up leashes. "You two are good together," she said, nodding toward Jake, who was across the room, filling water bowls. "I haven't seen him this happy in a long time. We're just—" I started, then realized I didn't know how to finish that sentence. We hadn't put a label on what we were doing, hadn't had the relationship conversation yet. We'd kissed, several heart-stopping times, but hadn't gone further, both seemingly content to take things slowly. Elena smiled knowingly. "Whatever you are, it's working for him. For both of you, I think." She was right. Something was working. I felt more settled, more present in my life than I had in years. My house was starting to feel like a home, especially when Jake and Max were in it. I'd even started writing again, just small snippets of the novel I'd abandoned years ago, but it was more than I'd managed in a long time. But as we approached the 2-month mark of whatever we were doing, I began to notice subtle shifts in Jake's behavior. He'd grow quiet sometimes, lost in thought in the middle of conversations. He'd check his phone more frequently when we were together, a small frown appearing between his brows. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd smile and say, "Just work stuff," or "nothing important." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was bothering him. The tension came to a head one evening when Jake was supposed to come over for dinner. He texted an hour before, asking for a rain check, citing a work emergency. It was the 3rd time in 2 weeks he'd canceled plans last minute. Concerned and, if I'm honest, a little hurt, I decided to walk over to his house to check on him, bringing some of the dinner I'd already prepared. When I arrived, his car was in the driveway, but he didn't answer the door. I was about to leave when I heard Max barking in the backyard. Following the sound, I walked around to the gate and found it unlocked. Max greeted me enthusiastically, and through the sliding glass door, I could see Jake sitting at his kitchen table, head in his hands, papers spread out in front of him. I knocked gently on the glass. Jake looked up, startled, then came to open the door, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like guilt. "Alex, I wasn't expecting you." "I was worried," I said simply. "And I brought food." I held up the container of pasta I'd brought. "Is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Come in." I should explain. At the kitchen table, I could now see what the papers were: real estate listings, job postings, and a letter with a London address on the envelope. My stomach dropped. "You're moving." Jake shook his head quickly. "No. Maybe. I don't know." He sat down heavily. "Ryan contacted me a few weeks ago. He's moving back to the States, to Boston. He asked if I'd consider relocating there. Said he made a mistake letting me go." The pasta container suddenly felt very heavy in my hands. I set it down carefully on the counter. "And what did you tell him?" "That I needed time to think." Jake wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "We have a lot of history, Alex. 6 years isn't easy to just write off." "I see." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too controlled, too calm. "And us? What are we in this equation?" Jake finally looked at me, his expression pained. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. What we have, it's new. It's good, really good. But I don't know what it is yet, where it's going." I nodded slowly, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. "So you've been pulling away while you decide whether to go back to your ex?" "It's not that simple," Jake protested. "I'm not comparing you to him or trying to choose between you. I'm just confused about what I want, about what's right." "And you didn't think to include me in this confusion? To talk to me about it?" Jake had the grace to look ashamed. "I should have. I know that. I just didn't want to worry you with something that might be nothing. Ryan and I have been over for a long time. This might just be nostalgia on his part. But you're considering it," I said, not a question. Jake didn't deny it. "I need to at least think about it. Otherwise, I might always wonder." I understood that, intellectually. But emotionally, standing in his kitchen with the evidence of his deliberation spread out before me, all I could feel was the familiar ache of being someone's maybe, someone's option rather than choice. I should go, I said, turning toward the door. Alex, wait. Jake stood, reaching for my arm. Please don't leave like this. Can we talk about it? What's there to talk about? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. You need space to figure things out. I get it. That's not what I'm saying. Jake's grip on my arm tightened slightly. I'm saying I'm confused, and I'm handling it badly, and I'm sorry for that. But I don't want you to walk away. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had, in just 2 months, become such an important part of my new life. The man whose laugh I'd come to crave, whose touch made my heart race, whose dog had quite literally led us to each other. And I saw the genuine conflict in his eyes, the fear, the uncertainty. I need some time too, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Jake nodded, releasing my arm. I understand. As I walked home that night, Max's forlorn bark echoing behind me as Jake called him inside, I felt as though the ground beneath my feet had shifted. The sense of belonging I'd been cultivating these past weeks suddenly felt precarious, conditional. The next few days passed in a blur of work and restless nights. Jake texted once, asking if we could talk when I was ready. I replied that I needed a little more time, which he respected. I threw myself into work, into unpacking the last of my boxes, into anything that would keep my mind occupied. But thoughts of Jake, and now, inevitably, thoughts of Ryan, kept intruding. What hurt most wasn't the possibility that Jake might choose his ex. It was the realization that while I'd been falling for him, opening myself up to the possibility of something real, he'd been holding back, keeping one foot out the door just in case a better option came along. Or was that fair? Had he really been holding back? Or was he just as surprised by his ex's reappearance as I was? And what right did I have to feel betrayed when we'd never defined what we were to each other? On the 4th day of this emotional spiral, I was startled by frantic knocking at my door. When I opened it, I found Elena from the shelter, looking worried. Have you seen Max? She asked without preamble. My heart skipped a beat. No. What's happened? He got out again this morning. Jake's been looking everywhere, called everyone he knows. He's frantic. How long has Max been missing? About 4 hours now. Jake said he was fine when he left for work, but when he came home for lunch, the back gate was open and Max was gone. A cold fear gripped me. 4 hours was a long time for a dog to be loose, especially one as friendly as Max who might approach strangers or, worse, traffic. I'll help look, I said immediately, grabbing my jacket and phone. Where's Jake now? Driving around the neighborhood. He asked me to check with you while he covers more ground in his car. I texted Jake as Elena and I split up to search different areas. No response, but I assumed he was focused on driving and looking. The afternoon stretched on, the sky darkening with approaching rain as I called Max's name through the neighborhood, checking under porches and open garages, asking everyone I encountered if they'd seen a golden retriever. As twilight fell and raindrops began to patter around me, my phone finally buzzed with a text from Jake. Nothing yet. Getting worried. Where are you? I told him my location, and within minutes, his car pulled up beside me. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, expression haunted. Any sign of him? I asked, though the answer was clear from Jake's face. He shook his head, voice rough. Nothing. I've been all over. Called the police, animal control, every shelter in a 20-mile radius. It's like he vanished. The rain was falling steadily now, soaking through my jacket. Jake didn't seem to notice the water dripping down his face, or maybe some of it wasn't rain. He'll be okay, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Max is smart. He knows the area. This is my fault, Jake said, his voice breaking. I must not have latched the gate properly this morning. I was distracted, thinking about everything. And now he's out there somewhere, alone, probably scared. I put my hand on his arm, the first contact between us in days. We'll find him, Jake. Let's keep looking. We searched for hours, driving slowly through neighborhoods, walking through parks with flashlights, calling Max's name until our voices grew hoarse. The rain became a downpour, then tapered to a drizzle, then stopped altogether, leaving a damp chill in the air. By midnight, even my determined optimism was flagging. We should take a break, I finally suggested, noting how Jake's hands were shaking from cold and exhaustion. Get warm, maybe get some coffee, then start again. Jake nodded numbly, following me back to my house, which was closer than his. Inside, I turned up the heat and found dry clothes for him to change into while I made coffee. When he emerged from the bathroom wearing my sweatpants and hoodie, looking vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before, something in my chest tightened. He's the only family I have here, Jake said quietly, accepting the mug I offered. My parents are both gone. My sister lives overseas. He's everything. I know, I said softly. And we're going to find him. Jake looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that night. I'm sorry, Alex. About everything. About not talking to you, about pulling away. I've been an idiot. This isn't the time for that conversation, I said gently. It is, though, Jake insisted. Because losing Max has made me realize what's important. And it's not some fantasy about rekindling things with Ryan. It's what's real, what's here. He set down his mug and took my hands in his. You're what's real, Alex. What we've been building these past months, that's what matters to me. I wanted to believe him. But doubt crept in, as it always does when you've been hurt before. You're upset about Max. This might not be the best time to make declarations. I'm upset about Max, Jake agreed, but I'm thinking more clearly than I have in weeks. I told Ryan no yesterday. Before Max disappeared, I told him I was building something new here, something that mattered to me, and I wasn't willing to walk away from it. I stared at him, processing this information. You did? Jake nodded. I was coming to tell you today. That's why I came home for lunch, to take Max for a quick walk, then come see you. And instead, I found the gate open and Max gone, and suddenly nothing else mattered except finding him. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it, then did a double take. Jake, I said urgently, it's from Mrs. Abernathy next door to you. She says there's a dog on her porch that looks like Max. We were in the car within seconds, driving the short distance to Jake's neighborhood in tense silence. As we pulled up to Mrs. Abernathy's house, the porch light illuminated a familiar golden shape huddled against the front door. Max. Jake's voice broke as he leapt from the car. The dog lifted his head, then bounded down the steps toward Jake with a joyful bark. The reunion was everything you'd expect. Jake on his knees in the wet grass, arms around his dog, face buried in Max's damp fur, murmuring words too quiet for me to hear. Mrs. Abernathy, a tiny woman in her 70s, appeared at her door in a bathrobe. He just showed up about 20 minutes ago, she called to us, scratching at my door like he knew someone would help. I thanked her profusely while Jake continued his reunion with Max, checking him over for injuries but finding only mud and a few burrs in his coat. He seems okay, Jake said finally, looking up at me with such naked relief that it took my breath away. Just wet and tired. Let's get him home, I suggested, and Jake nodded gratefully. Back at Jake's house, we toweled Max dry and checked him more thoroughly for any hidden injuries. He seemed perfectly fine if hungry and exhausted. After devouring a bowl of food, he collapsed on his bed in the living room, asleep almost instantly. Jake and I sat on the couch, the adrenaline of the search finally wearing off, leaving us both drained. Without thinking, I leaned against him, and his arm came around me naturally, pulling me closer. Thank you, he said softly, for helping look for him, for being here, for everything. I turned to look at him, our faces close. I care about Max too, you know. I know. Jake's free hand came up to touch my cheek. And I care about you. More than I've let myself admit. The confession hung between us, fragile and precious. I could have pulled back, could have insisted we needed more time to sort through the complications of the past week. But sitting there, with Max safely home and Jake looking at me like I was something valuable he'd almost lost, all I wanted was to move forward. I care about you too, I said simply. Jake's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. So where do we go from here? Forward, I suggested. Together. One day at a time. He nodded, leaning in to rest his forehead against mine. I like that. A lot. That night, I stayed at Jake's house, unwilling to leave Max after his ordeal and, if I'm honest, unwilling to leave Jake either. We slept in his bed, Max eventually joining us sometime in the early morning hours, sprawling between us like the world's furriest chaperone. In the soft light of dawn, watching Jake sleep with one hand resting protectively on Max's back, I felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that had been missing from my life for longer than I cared to admit. This was what home felt like, not a place, but a feeling, a connection. The weeks that followed weren't without their challenges. Jake and I had to rebuild some of the trust that had been shaken, had to learn how to communicate better about our fears and expectations. We had our first real fight when I found one of Ryan's letters that Jake had kept, leading to a painful but ultimately healing conversation about closure and moving on. But through it all, Max remained our constant, the furry catalyst who had brought us together and who seemed determined to keep us that way. He no longer needed to escape to my yard. Now he had a standing invitation, often spending afternoons with me when Jake was at work, the three of us sharing dinners and weekend outings like the family unit we were gradually becoming. 6 months after Max's first escape into my yard, Jake and I were having breakfast on my porch, enjoying the spring sunshine while Max dozed at our feet. Jake had been unusually quiet that morning, a familiar sign that he was working up to saying something important. "What's on your mind?" I finally asked, nudging his foot under the table. He smiled, reaching across to take my hand. "I was thinking about how we met. How Max kept showing up here. Your canine wingman," I teased, the story now a favorite among our friends. "Exactly." Jake's thumb traced patterns on my palm. "And I was thinking about how my lease is up next month." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh, and your house has that big yard that Max loves. And that office space that would be perfect for my work-from-home days. And that extra closet in the bedroom that's practically empty." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I could feel a smile tugging at my lips. "Are you asking to move in with me, Jake Sullivan?" "I'm asking if you consider sharing your home with me and this troublemaking matchmaker," Jake said, nodding toward Max, who had opened one eye at the mention of his name. "If it's too soon, I understand. We can wait." "Yes," I interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I'd love for you both to move in." Jake's face lit up with a joy that mirrored my own. "Really? You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I said honestly. "This house has felt more like a home since you two started spending time here. Might as well make it official." Jake leaned across the table to kiss me, a kiss full of promise and future plans. Max chose that moment to stand up and wedge himself between our legs, tail wagging as if he understood exactly what had just been decided. Looking down at him, I couldn't help but laugh. "I think he approves." "Of course he does," Jake said, reaching down to ruffle Max's ears. This was his plan all along. As I watched the two of them, the man and the dog who had changed my life in ways I never could have anticipated, I felt a profound gratitude for whatever twist of fate, whatever cosmic coincidence, had led Max to choose my yard that day. Sometimes the family you find, or the family that finds you, is exactly the one you need. And sometimes, just sometimes, it takes a golden retriever with a talent for escape to show you the way home. Total_char_count, 27,342.